We read literature for the heroes, and every hero needs a villain to defeat. But what if the real villain isn't the monster? What if it's the place, the environment, even the system where the monster lurks? What if it's not Dracula, but the castle that is the real terror in the story? We know Dracula, the pale aristocrat with fangs who drains the blood of his victims. One way to read this character is as a symbol of the feudal system that modern democracy replaced. He is a count, a nobleman of high rank, whose castle stands on a mountain pass in Transylvania. In Bram Stoker's novel, we also discover his medieval identity before he became the living dead. Stoker gives him the military title voivode, a title that was used in Eastern Europe for warlords, rulers, and regional governors, and indicates that he is the same Dracula that won fame fighting against the Turks. According to Stoker, Vlad the Impaler. While Dracula is not historical fiction, the allusion to a medieval ruler of particularly bloody fame suggests that the novel is about more than one kind of living dead. When Dracula was written in the 1890s, Great Britain was entering a new era born out of the social changes of the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution had moved a large portion of the working class off the estates of aristocrats and landed gentry and into the mills and factories of the cities. The result was dire urban poverty that led to widespread calls for social reform. In 1846, under public pressure, Parliament repealed the Corn Laws, which had protected the agricultural interests of the wealthy at the expense of poor families who couldn't afford to eat. This was an important first step in a long series of reforms. Within 2 decades of Dracula's publication in 1897, Britain passed laws that increased taxes for the wealthy, including heavy inheritance taxes on large estates, putting increased strain on the upper classes and their stranglehold on national wealth. Additionally, the House of Lords, where seats were inherited, was forced to give up some of its traditional power to the House of Commons, where seats were held by elected representatives. Early readers of Dracula knew that they were living in a society where inherited wealth and inherited power were finally giving way to the reforms of the modern world. So, in Stoker's novel, we get a villain who is a literal holdover from the Middle Ages, the living dead coming to suck out the lifeblood of London's population. And he has the whole resume of a medieval magnate. He is a warlord who is obeyed because he is feared. When Jonathan Harker arrives in Transylvania, he quickly and uneasily discovers that the locals are terrified of Dracula, a reminder that even after the serfs were freed, the nobles' control of the land meant that they were all still beholden to the local lord for their jobs and the operation of local government. Dracula's power over his domain is absolute. A woman who arrives at his gate pleading for her missing child is torn apart by the wolves who function as Dracula's personal protection force. There is no authority to whom he is accountable. His castle sits at a mountain pass, a reminder that fortifying the high ground was as much about controlling economic trade as it was about military advantage. He has a harem of 3 brides, because men of Dracula's class were never bound by the same moral code that they enforced for everyone else. Most terrifying of all are his dreams of expansion. Dracula is sometimes read by scholars as reflecting the fears of British imperialists at the possibility of reverse colonization. The idea that colonized people would migrate to the motherland and corrupt its culture with their own way of life. This reading, however, misses the psychological projection by British imperialists. Dracula isn't a migrant looking for a job. He's a medieval conqueror invading London with a biological weapon. Dracula doesn't just attack his victims to feed. His bites have the power to transform his victims into something like himself, creating a new kind of feudalism. The aristocracy of Europe was based on the notion that some bloodlines were inherently superior, and Dracula uses blood to subdue and subjugate. It is not the people resisting him, but rather Dracula himself who uses blood and soil as a means to achieve power. He turns the old aristocratic obsession with blood into a way to make a modern, technologically advanced society obedient to him once more. In the novel, the monster is defeated by a group of friends that scholars call the Crew of Light. They never use this term for themselves. It never appears in the novel, but it is a helpful description because it points to how they succeed. Once we strip away his ancient titles and hoarded wealth, we can see Dracula for what he is at the core. He's a predator, and predators thrive in the darkness. Like vampires, their power crumbles in the sunshine. The Crew of Light illuminates the darkness through the power of experience and expertise. Harker is a lawyer. Seward is a doctor with a specialization in what was then the new field of psychiatry. Van Helsing is a professor and philosopher with the ability to translate his arcane knowledge into practical action. Morris is an adventurer with skills in hunting and tracking. And finally, Harker's wife Mina is a professional secretary with skills in typing, shorthand, and file management. She proves what everyone in law, business, and education already knows: administrative assistants secretly run the world. It is Mina who takes the different diaries, logs, and professional notes of the community and pulls them together into a coherent narrative, matching dates so that Dracula's crimes can be seen in the emerging patterns. Her calm efficiency is matched by Van Helsing's expansive openness to the experience of others. If Mina brings structure, Van Helsing brings an empathy that makes practical solutions possible. How? Because Van Helsing has the capacity to believe the experiences of others, no matter how far-fetched they seem. When he deals with Lucy, he speaks the language of belief rather than blame, and this makes it possible for her to trust him with the information that he needs. Likewise, Harker has half convinced himself that the horrors he saw in Transylvania were delusions caused by mental illness. When Van Helsing assures him that indeed he saw what he saw and heard what he heard, Harker is able to face the reality of the situation and cope with it professionally. Seward is a capable doctor whose case notes document symptoms and reactions that are important tools for understanding how Dracula influences those around him. Morris's quick responses and cool head are essential to effective action. In other words, these characters demonstrate exactly what replaces the old order in modern society: the collective know-how of educated and independent people who are capable of keeping records and skilled at using their knowledge to get things done. At the novel's end, there is no way to deal with Dracula once and for all without taking the fight to the center of his power. Only at his castle, on the native soil in which he was buried, can his undead body be destroyed. However, there is a problem at the end of the story. Without too many spoilers, the way that Dracula is destroyed raises questions about whether he can come back. And Stoker chose to leave the castle itself, with its graves and gates and towers, still standing at the mountain pass. Why? The answer should give pause to anyone serious about dismantling abusive power in the modern world. You leave the monster's castle standing only if you're hoping for a sequel.